So some of you might have seen some of the news recently, so you've seen some videos about how Apple is finally allowing emulators on iOS. And that's something that I've always wanted. It's one of my things that I've always dreamed about happening. It just hasn't happened because Apple sucks. But for a long time now, the only ways you could possibly have gotten emulators in the past has been something like jailbreaking your phone, which has gotten progressively harder with each version of iOS, or just becoming like a developer and then you can re-authenticate developer apps, but you can only have like up to 3 or 2 at a time, and you have to re-authenticate them once every 7 days, and they also don't work after a while, and it just sort of sucks. It's very tedious and it's not particularly user-friendly, and that's just been very tedious for most people to do if they wanted emulators. So basically only people who like to tinker with software and stuff like that were the only ones who ever really did that. So most people end up not doing that, or they're just lazy like me and chose not to do it in favor of alternative options. But I made a whole video talking about the old way of emulating games on your iPhone a few months ago, so that video is completely irrelevant now. With this new news and ability that Apple's now allowing emulators in iOS, has the iPhone become the new king of emulation? The iPhone has always been one of the most powerful mobile devices, to the point that Apple took their own mobile design chips and expanded upon them for desktop and laptop hardware because of how powerful and efficient the iPhone chips are. So the iPhone has the potential to be a very powerful device for emulation. Development has been moving relatively quick and has only been a few weeks since Apple first allowed this to happen. And options have already popped up, and one has already been shut down by Apple. But Apple claims that it was because the app was a knockoff and basically stole code from a different app. But that whole situation's kind of confusing. But what's important is that Apple basically said that the actual functionality of the app wasn't in question. That isn't why it got banned. It didn't get banned because of it using ROMs and it was an emulator. It's because it used ill-gotten gains, basically. They stole code or copied code or something like that from a different emulation app that I believe the same or a different developer worked on. It's really complicated, and I will not go into any detail about that really, because I'll be talking about the new app that came right out after. The Delta app is so far the most feature-complete emulator, so far emulating NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy Color, GBA, and DS. So basically only Nintendo hardware. Some of you might be familiar with the Delta app, being one of those apps that you could verify for 7 days at a time in the old way of running emulators on iOS. The emulator has little to no ways of modifying or changing the way the game plays or looks, but generally speaking, if you like the clean pixel look and you don't really care about having any CRT filters or upping the resolution, the games don't really need you to require any settings though. They all run amazingly. Some of the smoothest N64 and DS emulation I've ever seen. Give it some time and we should be able to see all the emulation options that we have on Android on iOS. It'd be awesome to see RetroArch, Dolphin, Nather SX2 come to iOS. It'd be awesome to be able to play all my retro library on my phone. The games run better than some of the devices I've reviewed on this channel. That makes sense. The iPhone has always been, like I said, one of the most powerful mobile devices. Even all the way back in 2014 when they first unveiled the iPhone 6, one of the major talking points was the graphical horsepower of that year's iPhone. And it was even compared in the keynote to the Xbox 360, and that was all the way back in 2014, which in time, that has only become more powerful to the point that when PS2 and GameCube emulation finally show up on the platform, they should be able to run at amazing qualities without a single flaw. iPhone is even at the point where it could play AAA games like Resident Evil and Death Stranding. So I would say the iPhone would be plenty powerful enough to run GameCube and PS2, even Switch emulation. It's just a matter of time before devs start releasing emulators en masse on the iPhone. bear in mind, it won't just be the iPhone, it will also be the iPad, which is one of the most popular tablets out there. The process it took for me to get my ROMs onto the iPhone was a little bit weird, but I managed to back up my ROM library to Google Drive and connect it to the iPhone's file app, and I was able just to copy and paste my ROMs from a ROMs folder on Google Drive to a ROMs folder that I made in the Files app. Then I was able to go into the Delta app, and then whenever I was prompted to link a folder or a ROMs folder or whatnot for each console, I was able just to open up the Files app, point it to my N64 folder, and then I was done. The only hiccup that I had was I had to find Nintendo DS firmware and BIOS files, which those were pretty easy to get my hands on. All I did was just Google DS BIOS and I found a GitHub repository, which I will have pinned in the comments down below if anybody else might need those. And you also might find some other things you might want or need for in the future. Wink, wink, please don't sue me. For a comfortable experience, I would recommend getting a controller. So I'm using the Backbone Controller V2, but I don't really like it, even though it claims to work with iPhone 14 Plus, which that's the iPhone that I have. It barely fits, and it's the only way I can get the controller to sit flat in the thing is if it's all cockeyed and stuff, and it just at a crooked angle. It just can't be good for the lightning port. Or the only other way I can get it is if it's crushing my cameras on the back. Doing that, instead of bending the lightning port to the one side, it's bending it upwards, which also can't be good for the port. This controller is $100. I'm going to be switching to the Razer Kishi V1. It's a little old and bulky, but it shouldn't have any of the problems I've been having with the Backbone controller. It will also be cheaper, but I would have expected better build quality and overall better compatibility for a controller that costs $100. It's absolutely dumb about how much this controller costs. And I don't necessarily blame Backbone even, I blame Apple for that because they had their dumb MFI program, and which basically certifies any Lightning device. And if you have the new iPhone, the 15 and 15 Pro and whatnot, thankfully you have a USB-C port now, so you should be able to buy any USB-C controller that you could possibly want, and it should work just fine. So you can save a lot of money if you buy literally any other controller if you have a new iPhone. And if you have an old iPhone, I suggest getting like a used Razer Kishi for like 25 bucks. Killer deal. You could also buy a wireless controller. The iPhone works with Xbox controllers, Joy-Cons, PlayStation controllers. Basically any controller, standard you really would want to use, you can use on the iPhone. It just might be a little weird. And they also make wireless attachable controllers. Companies like GameSir make some really popular options designed for the iPhone. I personally don't like wireless controllers all that much unless it's just in a pinch, because I'm not sensitive to latency. It doesn't feel good using a wireless controller in my opinion. It just doesn't make precise movements feel all that great, especially if you're playing something like Mario 64. On top of that, it's just another thing to charge that I will constantly forget to charge. So I like it when a controller can be fully attached to my phone or device. It just, for me, is more convenient, and sometimes they even add features like on this Backbone controller, it adds a headphone jack, which the iPhone doesn't have. So that's pretty convenient. So what do you think? I would love to hear what you guys think about emulation on the iPhone. Are you going to try it out, or are you going to wait until you can emulate some of the heavier consoles like GameCube and PS2? I would love to hear what you guys think about this. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, all that other social media garbage down below, and last but not least, have a wonderful day.